Manager. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, click Show CC in the bottom taskbar and select English as the spoken language. At the end of the presentation, we'll have time for questions and answers. To ask a question at any time, please use the Q&A tab also in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it off to Alexis Bylander, Director of Child Nutrition Programs and Policy at FRAC. Take it away, Alexis.
Great. Thank you, Steve, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is focused on three main topics. First, the historic cuts to the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, known as SNAP, in H.R. 1 that was signed into law on July 4th. Second, how those cuts ripple across other federal nutrition programs. And then third, what we can do to push back and protect progress in child nutrition. A core message today is that children need to be food secure both at home and at school. H.R. 1 is a real hit to that vision by reducing SNAP benefits for families and cutting some households off SNAP entirely. While some provisions only target adults, children cannot thrive if the adults in their lives are hungry. Persistent household food insecurity has devastating consequences for households and communities. Gina, our SNAP director, will explain what H.R. 1 changed and what it means for families using SNAP and for states administering the program. As food insecurity at home increases, the child nutrition programs become even more critical. We have long known that many children get most of their meals, and often their best meals, at school. School meals are an essential nutrition and academic support, giving kids the focus and energy that they need to succeed during the day. A principal once told me that his school saw a big decrease in behavioral issues during the pandemic when waivers from USDA allowed schools to offer breakfast and lunch to all students at no cost. While that in some ways is great to hear, it's also heartbreaking because it means that some of the challenges in our country's schools could be solved by something as simple as access to healthy food during the day. Another big message today is that cuts to SNAP will not stay confined to SNAP. The federal nutrition programs are intentionally intertwined. And it's intertwined and interconnected. SNAP eligibility directly links children to free school meals, summer EBT, and WIC. These connections reduce red tape and ensure that families get support, but they also mean that SNAP cuts create harmful ripple effects. Erin, Clarissa, and Kate will walk through how these changes impact school meals, the Child and Adult Care Food Program, the Summer Nutrition Program, and WIC. And then finally, we have really made hard-won progress over the years when it comes to standing up new programs and passing policies that reduce food insecurity. As an example, today about 60% of schools using the National School Lunch Program offer free meals to all students through either the community eligibility provision or a state healthy school meal for all policy. And 38 states are planning to implement summer EBT this year, providing $120 in grocery benefits per eligible child when school is out. As the federal government shifts SNAP costs to states, there will be pressure to cut from state budgets elsewhere. Our job is to ensure that states do not undermine one food security program, such as Healthy School Meals for All, to pay for another. So let's get to it. I'll turn it over to Gina to walk through the SNAP cuts included in H.R. 1.
Thank you, Alexis, and thank you everyone for coming today. Happy New Year. I know it's already been a very long week for most of us, but thank you for taking the time to care about this issue because as we know, children don't live in a silo. They live with parents, they live with caretakers, they live with families, and SNAP has, next slide please, has such a cyclical and important pivotal impact on not just families, but on the economies and the communities where they reside. It's interconnected with having sufficient federal funding that goes into schools, that goes into paving potholes so that states don't have to choose one over the other. We do know that SNAP is the #1 federal program that helps families eat. And so it's incredibly important that we do protect it. Next slide, please. And it's important as we're talking about the pivotal, like how important this program is that we talk about the economic impact. The SNAP benefits go from the federal government to a recipient who then utilizes it at the local retailer, the mom and pop store, the grocery store, in whatever space. And that translates into thousands of jobs, billions of wages, taxes. And this is just the local grocer data. We haven't even seen, we don't have here the national data. We have over 260,000 EBT retailers that participate across the state, impacting each and one of our towns and cities, creating a huge ripple effect on the economy. That's what federal funds do in terms of SNAP. And so what are we facing here today? Next slide, please. Apologies, before we get there, we should say that one thing that it is important to know is that, and we saw this during the shutdown, we saw that during COVID, is that our food banks, our food pantries, those of you who are here, you are superheroes. You are amazing. But food pantries, food banks, for every meal that they provide, SNAP provides 9, right? It allows people to be able to purchase the food that they need in their own time at the right time. And we do know like the economic impact that this has. So SNAP is so incredibly important, and it's important to keep of that as we engage in these conversations. Next slide, please. So where are we today? We are facing the biggest cuts to SNAP. Historically, we've never seen this. I'm going to go down a list and give you just a brief overview of like what this means. So the summer happened, July 4th, President Trump signed the reconciliation law, and in it had these SNAP cuts along with other cuts, including Medicaid and Medicare and so on. So for SNAP Ed, the program that allows nutrition education in classes, that is incredibly important for individuals, for children, but also provided jobs, that was defunded beginning October 1st. So meaning you might have heard and seen that many individuals lost their jobs. Expanded time limits. This means that families with kids 14 and up, people who are taking care of grandchildren 14 and up, people who are 18 to 64 now have to meet this time-led requirement, meaning that they can only get SNAP for 3 months in a 3-year period. If not, they are cut off if they can't show that they're working at least 20 hours a week. And we do know the majority of SNAP recipients are working. They're just working part-time, and there are various reasons why they may not be gaining full employment. The last Labor Bureau statistics show the majority of people who were working part-time wanted to find full-time job. They just weren't there. The economy is not there. Automation, a weak job market prohibits individuals who are within this job frames to be able to get full-time employment. And even those who may be working full-time are not making enough money to be able to escape poverty. So we will see beginning in the spring, this was started July 4th, beginning in the spring, many people will be getting cut off, including those who are unhoused, those who are veterans, youth aging out of foster care. So just want to flag that the time limits were expanded from 54 to 64 to capture more people. And when we saw this in 2023, when individuals were expanded from 49 to 54, we saw over 700,000 people lose their benefits. So something that we're going to be watching very closely, but want to make sure that you are aware. And again, for this conversation here, kids 14 and up, kids are still kids at 15, 16. Majority of our country doesn't have transportation. There are reasons why parents, particularly single parents, need to be there for their kids, and to say that they're going to lose their benefit, the parent, because they can't find enough hours, is going to have a detrimental impact. Internet costs, it means that there will be people are not going to be able to claim this, so they're not going to see more adequate SNAP benefit amounts, including with utility deductions, meaning that older adults and people with disabilities, they're the ones who are going to be automatically be able to claim this particular deduction. Others will have to show that they are getting LIHEAP, but this just increases red tape. And there's a huge portion of the population, non-citizen eligible individuals, our neighbors who are refugees, asylees, and others, that if they don't have a green card, even though they have been eligible, they are no longer eligible for SNAP. And our thrifty food plan, it's also stagnant, regardless that food prices are more expensive than they have ever been, and other inflation, food prices will stay stagnant. So what does all of this mean? All of this means that the state agency is working to make sure that they implement all of this. Guidance was finally giving out on all of them. November 1st, implementation moved forward. Beginning FY27, states are going to have to pay an additional 25% of administrative costs. at the same time where they're being asked to implement very rushed provisions that we just saw. And then beginning the following year, they're going to have to pay a portion of the cost of these benefits. So why are we saying this? Because all of these increases administrative costs, and yet these are being cut. States are going to have to pick this up. The time, there's going to be greater staff time and increased staffing needs is going to be made for funds. And to have, for the first time in history, the benefit, states having to pay a benefit amount is going to be detrimental. And we have heard from some states, in accordance to the Congressional Budget Office, that some states may eventually pull out of the program because they will not be able to sustain it. Next slide. So what does it look like? If things move forward as they are written right now, it means that states like California, for example, will have new costs of about over $2 billion, New York, almost $2 billion, Florida, over $1 billion, Texas, and so on. Your state, SNAP, has never been part of a state item budget because federal benefits have always been covered by the government. So this will have a detrimental effect. And these are funds that could have been utilized in other cases, not having to be coming out of the budget in order to continue the program as is. Next slide. And we know that if SNAP is not protected, if state agencies cut eligibility, if state legislatures cut eligibility for SNAP recipients, and they make it more harder for people to access SNAP, we are going to see an increase more than we see now in food insecurity. And we know that hunger costs our country over $170 billion a year, because we know it has direct healthcare costs and also indirect healthcare costs, as such as people who get sick because they don't have enough food. And it also has costs on primary and secondary dropouts, which is very pivotal to the conversation that we're having today. Next slide, please. So as we look at now, we are seeing a weakened state budget. After years of rapid expansion, rainy funds, because that's what they are, have slowed. And if you look at your state budget in general, the State Budget Association said that for the last fiscal year, majority of the state budget, as you can see, it goes to Medicaid, then K-12 and other. But those are the two biggest pieces. You don't see SNAP in here. When we look at public assistance, the 1%, it's for administrative costs. It's mostly for TANF, and then this very minor for administrative costs. It doesn't really make a dent. Then when you also look at the total state expenditures by funding source, you'll notice that almost equally have been federal funds. This year was incredibly difficult for states to do their budget because we didn't have enough federal funding. Next year, as you're starting in your new state legislature, you're going to see less federal funding because of the cuts that not only went to SNAP, but also to healthcare and to K-12 education. So states are really going to have to figure out, how do they manage? How do they add? And I mentioned the rainy funds because rainy funds is one type emergency. We saw the shutdown and what it did in terms of people not having access to SNAP benefit, making literally difficult decisions. And even though some states really stepped up, they couldn't fully do what the SNAP program did. And they couldn't be continuous and do what the federal government could have done. So we're highly concerned of what the state's going to have to do and the decisions it's going to make, particularly, next slide, because there is a growing concern over a recession. We know that almost half of the states are currently at risk or in a recession, meaning that they don't have more funding that is coming in. And this is coming all at the time where HR 1 implementations went into effect on November 1st. We do know that the healthcare also will have begun this year. All of that combined will put a lot of pressure between state legislators having to choose which programs are pivotal, which is why we're here to talk about how important SNAP and other programs are. I'll turn it over back to you, Alexis.
And I think we're going over to Erin, right?
Hey, thanks, Alexis, and thanks, Gina. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the call today. So as most of you are aware, SNAP and child nutrition programs are very closely linked. Children who participate in SNAP are automatically eligible for free school meals without having to submit a meal application through a process known as direct certification. Next slide, please. Direct certification leverages data and technology to match children who participate in SNAP, TANF, FDPIR, and in most states, Medicaid, to free school meals. Doing so really helps to ensure that eligible children have access to the nutrition that they need during the school day. It gives them access to free school breakfast and free school lunch. Direct certification helps fight school day hunger, and it eases the paperwork burdens on school nutrition departments. It eases administrative burdens, and it really streamlines the administration and the operation of school meals. It creates for efficiencies within school nutrition departments. When children lose access to SNAP through HR 1, they will lose their automatic eligibility for free school meals. Eligible children will fall through the cracks. Classroom hunger will rise, and school nutrition departments will be saddled with increased paperwork and administrative burdens. Next slide, please. Direct certification also serves as the basis for determining eligibility and federal reimbursement for the Community Eligibility Provision, or CEP. CEP allows high poverty schools to offer all students free school breakfast and lunch, regardless of individual household income or circumstance. It is a game changer for school meals. By offering all students free school meals, regardless of individual household income, we are raising nutrition equity and reducing the stigma that is often associated with free or reduced price meal participation. In fact, school meal participation increases significantly when schools adopt CEP. At FRAC, we like to say CEP creates hunger-free schools by ensuring that students have access to healthy meals during the school day. As children lose access to SNAP, direct certification rates will decrease, and schools' ability to implement CEP will also suffer. Some schools will no longer be eligible to participate, and schools that are still eligible will receive less federal reimbursement, less federal funding to implement the program. This is going to make it very financially challenging for school nutrition departments that are already financially strapped. And this would be devastating to schools. As schools drop off of the community eligibility provision, they will face increased meal debt, increased administrative burdens, and increased operational challenges. But most importantly, children will lose. Children will go hungry during the school day. It's a lose-lose situation for everybody. Next slide. So looking specifically at the administrative and benefit cost shifts that Gina mentioned, states' attempts to control costs will result in fewer children on SNAP, which, as I just mentioned, has this negative ripple effect throughout school meals. Negative ripple effect on direct certification and schools' ability to implement the community eligibility provision. OMB estimates that 96,000 children will lose child nutrition subsidies through the benefit cost shift alone. States may also try to control costs by limiting or eliminating broad-based categorical eligibility in SNAP. We know from prior analysis of previous proposals back in 2019 that looked at cutting BBCE nationwide, that's going to have serious negative effects on children and their automatic access to free school meals. Back in 2019, an analysis of the proposal to cut broad-based CAT-L nationwide found that nearly 1 million children would lose their direct or automatic access to free school meals. And since that analysis was conducted, even more states have adopted broad-based CAT-L, meaning that the impact will be even greater today. Next slide.
Great. Thank you, Erin. So let's go ahead and shift to the connection between HR 1 and the Summer After School and Child and Adult Care Food Program, or CACFP. So like school meals, there were no direct cuts to these programs in the budget reconciliation package. However, like school meals, that does not mean that they will not be impacted by the SNAP cuts that Gina walked through. So the biggest ripple effect that we will see with these programs is around what we call area eligibility, which is how a community is eligible to participate in these programs. And this is important because these programs are the programs that fill the nutrition gap that we know exists outside the school day, after hours, and during the summer months. So basically, in order to participate in these programs, sites need to be located in an area where at least 50% of the children are eligible for free or reduced price meals. And for the most part, that is data that is pulled directly from school meals data, including direct certification that Erin just mentioned. So if fewer families are participating in SNAP, or if they are forced off the program, that could mean that there is not enough school data to justify that community being eligible to participate in summer and after school. When it comes to CACFP in childcare home settings, it's a little bit different. What this data lets them do is it helps to determine what their reimbursement rate is. So if there is a reduction in the number of students with low incomes participating in school meals, then that will push more of our home-based childcare providers out of Tier 1 into Tier 2 when it comes to reimbursement. And Tier 2 is about, the rate for that is about 50% less than Tier 1. So that is how the data will be impacted for those programs. And it may, again, result in fewer sites being able to meet that 50% area eligibility threshold. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about summer EBT and how this could also be impacted. So like you've been hearing, summer EBT also relies very heavily on a process which for this program is called streamlined certification, which is basically if families are eligible for free or reduced price meals, or if they are participating in programs such as SNAP, TANF, and Medicaid, they automatically receive summer EBT benefits if their state is participating in the program. So what does this mean for the impact? We know that as HR 1 limits the number of children on SNAP, it's going to mean fewer children who are directly certified for school meals, and then it's going to mean that more families have to complete a summer EBT application. So like Erin mentioned, we know that this is going to cause some families to fall through the cracks when it comes to this program, and it's also going to increase the admin burden on states who have to process applications, and just an additional burden on families to fill that out. We also know that when it comes to summer EBT, there will actually be a subset of children who will lose access to the program entirely, and that includes children who lose access to SNAP who are homeschooled or not at an NSLP school. The last piece here that I want to mention is changes around the Thrifty Food Plan. So this is the food plan that sets the monthly SNAP allotment, and it's also used for summer EBT and for changes in those rates. So if that is frozen, we just know that the rates and the benefit level for summer EBT over the next couple years will become inadequate. And then the last thing that I'll say here before I pass it off to Kate to talk about WIC is that, like Gina mentioned, we know that these cuts and the additional costs that states are going to have to cover may result in them scaling back on some programs. And with summer EBT, states do have to cover half of the administrative costs of operating this program, and we actually still have states who are choosing not to opt in. So as we talk about states' ability to cover the costs of programs, if there is an additional cost for SNAP, we know that it may make operating summer EBT more difficult for all states moving forward. Next slide, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to Kate.
Yes, hi everybody. Unfortunately, with WIC, the hits just keep on coming. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Kate Scully, and I'm the Deputy Director of WIC at FRAC. And as we know, like all of these programs, WIC is a critical piece of nutrition support provided. And without WIC, millions of pregnant and postpartum individuals, infants, and young children would not have the nutrition support they need to grow and thrive. So as my colleagues have shared, HR 1, as it was passed, it had devastating cuts for many critical programs. And while like the other child nutrition programs, WIC was not directly impacted by this bill, we do know that families who participate in WIC are also relying on programs like SNAP and Medicaid. So those households will be hit really hard. And indirectly, WIC is impacted due to the adjunctive eligibility, which is a process where individuals who are already eligible for SNAP, Medicaid, or TANF are deemed income eligible for WIC. This process makes WIC easier to access for applicants and puts less of a burden on the states to recheck income eligibility. However, if a household is cut off of SNAP or Medicaid due to HR 1, then their adjunctive eligibility for WIC is also impacted. When they go to certify or recertify for the program, they'll now have to supply that income information necessary to show their eligibility. With over 80% of WIC participants also participating in SNAP, Medicaid, and/or TANF, this impacts a large portion of the WIC population. And while this may sound like a minor inconvenience, we know that families already face numerous barriers to accessing WIC, as shown by the overall low participation rate. So any additional barriers will only hinder that access. So just another way that this HR1 is trickling down to impact even more of the nutrition programs. I'm going to pass it back to Alexis.
Great, thanks, Kate. So now I will cover what we think that we can do to protect the progress that we've made to date. So next slide. To summarize all the information that we have shared today, FRAC has created a policy brief that provides an overview of the connection between the cuts to SNAP and the impact on the other federal nutrition programs. And we will email that out as follow-up to this webinar along with the slides. And I just want to give a big shout out to Erin for taking the lead on creating this brief and to all the people at FRAC that provided content for it. Next slide. So now let's take a look at what we can do to mitigate the harms of HR1. First and foremost, we must urge Congress to repeal the cuts to SNAP. The Restoring Food Security for American Families and Farmers Act of 2025 is the key legislative vehicle to undo the damage that was caused by HR1. Steve is going to put a link to the bill overview in the chat, and Gina will be talking more about opportunities for advocacy in a minute. And I just wanted to say that someone asked me during a presentation last month if I really believe that the cuts to SNAP can be repealed. And I wanted to share my answer to that question again today. I say that we have to believe that these cuts can be rolled back because if we don't believe that it's possible, no one else will. And we have to keep in mind that there were a group of people who believed that they could fundamentally change and dismantle the way that Americans in need access SNAP benefits and change how the program is administered and the relationship between the state and federal government for this program. And they succeeded with HR1. So we need to have an equal level of resolve that change is possible. We need to document the harm that the cuts to SNAP and HR1 are causing and call on members of Congress to reverse the cuts and increase food security for children, individuals, and families. So second, schools must conduct robust direct certification this school year. As Erin discussed, children in SNAP households are automatically linked to free school meals through a process known as direct certification. School districts should conduct really comprehensive direct certification efforts this school year so that they can fully capture all eligible children that should be receiving free school meals, and also so that they have the numbers that they need to operate CEP in a financially viable way if they are eligible for it. Third, we need to expand children's access to school breakfast, summer meals, and after-school snacks and meals. As the SNAP cuts limit families' food resources at home and cause household hunger to rise, children will become more dependent on the nutrition provided through school meals and the other child nutrition programs. I know that for many of you with us today, building up after-school snack and meal programs, doing outreach on behalf of summer food sites, encouraging schools to do breakfast in the classroom, and other evidence-based strategies are not new. But the cuts to SNAP provide a new hook and a new sense of urgency when talking to partners like after-school providers, summer programs, and principals about why these programs need to really be as strong as possible right now. Fourth, we want to remove barriers for families applying for WIC. Some families will now need to prove that they are income eligible for WIC when in the past they had adjunctive eligibility through SNAP. So now is a great time to make sure that applying for WIC is as easy as possible. So it's a good time to take a look at the WIC application process in your community and see if there are any ways to streamline it. And then finally, we all need to be ambassadors for the importance of the child nutrition programs. The role that they play for food insecure children cannot be overstated, and it's imperative that our friends, families, neighbors, and policymakers understand the value of the child nutrition programs like school meals, summer food, after-school meals, and summer EBT. We need to send the message to elected officials that one program that provides food security to children cannot be cut to cover another in state budgets. All of these programs work together to provide a much-needed nutrition safety net. So with that, I will turn it over to Gina, who will talk about some advocacy opportunities. Oh, I'm sorry. And before we get to that, I just wanted to put a plug in for a webinar that FRAC did not too long ago that provides more information about strategies for mitigating the harm of HR1. It's available on YouTube, and a link will be included in the slides.
Wonderful. I think Alexis covered most of our advocacy steps incredibly well. But we just want to talk about a specific bill that Alexis briefly touched upon. Next slide, please. The Restoring Food Security for American Families and Farmers will take us back to July 3rd. July 4th was the time when the bill was signed, and so we are dealing with the fallout. Just remember that just as this bill passed, there are always mechanisms for members of Congress to scale back those efforts and to say, we realize now the shutdown has shown us how pivotal SNAP was. Our economy is suffering. Our states can't afford this. We need to be investing that money in innovative ways, like Alexa said, to support child nutrition, to support all of our community. We, along with our other national partners, let out a letter that was signed by over 1,000 national, state, community-based organizations, including many of you who let Congress know that this was a priority. So we encourage you, as you're doing your advocacy, as you're meeting with your state legislators, as you're meeting with your mayor, and you're talking about how are we going to deal with the fallout with SNAP, the main thing that should go to them is say, hey, can you reach out to your colleague in Congress, to your senator, to your state representative, and let them know how harmful this is and how they need to claw this back. And I say this because, you know, your mayor, your state representative, they understand the challenges of state budgeting and what they're going to have to choose. And they can be great spokesperson. And you, along with them, can really give them the talking points. So FRAC is really moving forward to let, as we begin the new year, as we saw in November and October, how difficult it was for families across the US, to begin with a day of action. So on December 15, we're asking everyone to really talk about the impact that SNAP has on families, on children, our communities, to let your members of Congress, our members of Congress, know that this year we will not stay idly quiet as we talk about the importance of SNAP. So we really encourage you, if you have signed up to this webinar, we will send a call to action that you will receive as well, with action steps, a fact sheet of why it is so important to not just restore SNAP, to protect it so that we don't cause any more harm. And I know we also have a couple of questions, so I'll turn it over to Alexis, but my colleague Stephen has put it there, the bill overview. And as you're having your conversations, as you're planning out your legislative session for this year, really hone in on how your state cannot afford to cover the cost for SNAP, and that the federal government needs to, if not completely eliminated, really delayed a lot of the provisions, the cost share and the administrative provisions that are in the bill.
Okay, great. Thanks, Gina. I'm just taking a look at here what we've answered and what we haven't. Erin, I'm going to start with you with a question here that says, for states that have universal free school meals, will there be an impact beyond financial and CEP certification?
Sure. I mean, I think our biggest concern is that financial cost shift, not the SNAP cost shift, but essentially as federal reimbursement for school meals decreases in healthy school meals for all states, or even our states that do CEP subsidies, their burden, their share of covering the cost for school meals will increase. So that is clearly and obviously the biggest concern. But as schools start to come off CEP, they lose all of those benefits that we talked about that come with implementing the community eligibility provision. And that's those administrative savings, not having to collect and process and verify all the paperwork. So all of those administrative inefficiencies are going to return. So as schools start to drop off of CEP, all of those kind of paperwork burdens and everything that keeps school nutrition professionals kind of chained to their desk rather than out in the schools and communities are going to come back. So that's going to be problematic. And it might also affect staffing levels, participation levels, meal debt. So even at the local level, we're going to see a financial implication happening. Increased paperwork burdens. Clarissa touched on summer meals and area eligibility, so we can see some of that. And there's also the link to summer EBT. So when children are directly certified for free school meals, they are streamlined certified, or again, automatically eligible for summer EBT. So as they lose their direct certification, those children will have to start submitting applications, and that's going to increase burdens on the state agency level. So that's going to increase paperwork on the state agency level. And then another thing with summer EBT is that children who are homeschooled or attend virtual schools, they cannot submit an application for summer EBT. So if they lose SNAP access, those children who are homeschooled or virtual learning, they will no longer be able to get summer EBT at all. So that'll be very problematic. So I think to wrap it up, the cost to states implementing healthy school meals for all is definitely going to be the biggest thing that we're focused on, but there's all these other ripple effects that go down to the local level, the individual student and the household, around paperwork and processes that are going to become problematic too.
Great, thank you. And then let's stick with you, Erin. There's a question from Abby from California who says, does FRAC have guidance about when schools should rebase community eligibility provision and provision 2 numbers to be able to insulate from the HR 1 cuts for the longest amount of time?
And since in this past, in the beginning of the school year, is comprehensive and robust direct certification this school year. Right, keeping in mind that once a child is directly certified for free school meals, they retain that eligibility for free school meals throughout the entire school year, regardless of changes in SNAP participation, regardless of changes in household income. Meaning that if a child was receiving SNAP in August and they were directly certified, and then they lost SNAP benefits, say in February, they still get free school meals and they're still counted towards the school's ISP for CEP. So what we are talking about and what we are encouraging is schools to continue to do comprehensive, robust direct certification this school year. And that includes also looking at your students who are categorically eligible, working with your homeless liaisons, your school counselors, your guidance counselors to identify those children who are unhoused, who are from migratory families, who are homeless and runaways, identifying all those categorically eligible children to capture them in your counts as well. When your ISP numbers come out in April, look at your percentages. If your ISP, and this is getting pretty wonky for people who are not into school meals, so feel free to reach out afterwards if you have questions. But if your percentage has remained the same or even dropped a little bit, but is still a financially viable level, we would strongly consider you recertifying and doing the same thing next school year, but before some of these bigger cost shifts start to go into effect for some states. So this year and next year, and constantly reevaluating this April and April or spring of 2027. And if your ISPs stay relatively the same, or even if they drop a little bit, but it's still financially viable for you to implement CEP, we would say restart that cycle. Of course, you want to do this in collaboration with your larger school district as well as your state agency, but definitely take a look at those numbers. I was at a conference in Maine, a school nutrition conference in Maine in August, and one of the directors rightfully said, oh, I just started CEP this year. This is my first cycle. I just did all of that work. And when you think about very small school districts, they don't always have the capacity that larger school districts might have. And it's a challenge, it's a burden, it's unfortunate, but that would be the recommendation. If you want to extend that CEP reimbursement, you got to continue to do that direct certification as frequently as possible this year and next year.
Great, thank you, Erin. And it's nice to see Dustin saying in the chat that Oregon is taking that approach, essentially recertifying CEP for all National School Lunch Program sponsors this spring. There's another question in the chat here that I'm going to start by answering and then open it up to see if anybody else wants to answer it. The question says, are these mitigation of harm tactics mostly in the context of federal advocacy or translatable to state programs as well? I would say that there's something to do at every level of government here, federal government, state legislature down to school districts and community programs. So the legislation to repeal the SNAP cuts is something at the federal level, and every member of Congress needs to be hearing about how deplorable these cuts to SNAP are. So there's a role for all of us to play in that. At the state level, we really need to rally around the innovative state policies that exist in so many places. 9 states have healthy school meals for all programs. 3 states in the District of Columbia have universal breakfast. A lot of states cover the reduced priced copay, so families don't need to pay 40 cents for lunch and 30 cents for breakfast. The state government picks up that tab and offers those meals for free at schools. We need to be telling state legislatures how impactful those child nutrition policies are and that they need to continue, even as states look to cover SNAP costs that have never been included in their budgets before. At the school level, there's so much that schools can do to support child nutrition, breakfast after the bell, breakfast in the classroom, making sure that their after-school programs offer snacks and meals if they're eligible, getting the word out about summer food sites. So I just think that there is a lot to do. Does anyone else want to add anything in response to that question?
I would add that there's also progressive tax reform that people need to think about it. We saw in New Mexico, universal childcare. Colorado passed a ballot measure to be able to cover, I believe it's healthy school meals. Alexis, you're all the experts, but it also, the part that I want to hone in is part of the administrative cost. Ideally, you all are going to be amazing. Call your members of Congress and say like, hey, the cost share needs to be completely gone. We're really struggling to protect the program. But your state legislature has begun, right? Like you start in January, you're thinking of the budget for most of you. And so while the error rates, which are attached to the benefit cost, are year to year out, your state budget, you're already thinking about this. And we do know that some states are thinking about to ensure that SNAP will be covered. One of the questions here is, if SNAP is an entitlement program, what do you mean that states will pull out? States don't have to participate if you don't have the funding, and the ones that will suffer are individuals. So really starting to having those conversations about how important it is. The biggest users of SNAP are children. If this program is cut down, children won't have access to this. And while all of these programs are incredibly pivotal, kids are not in school 7 days a week. What happens during winter breaks, what happens during summer vacations. Yes, there are some options, but not across the country. So it's really the best thing you could do locally right now is really talk about all the positive impacts so that your local elected is aware of the cuts and the changes so that they can communicate it to their colleagues at the federal level, and also reach out to your federal member as well. And last thing I'll say is that we have a playbook that will come out soon about the positive, the ways that you can look tax revenue to be able to cover all of these programs. So we'll be sending that out as well.
Great,
let me answer a question, Alexis, because there somebody asked, like, how do you measure kids as the highest percentages of SNAP? We have USDA publishes a report into who utilizes SNAP, and based on that the demographics, it shows that the major category of SNAP utilization is by children, and then we have older adults, we have people with disabilities, and then the caretaker of children, and then we have our other buckets.
Yeah, and I'll jump in here too. There's a question in the chat around when should we expect to see the impact on area eligibility and CEP? So like Gina mentioned, I mean, the cost sharing piece is really going to be the big thing here, which doesn't roll out till fiscal year 27 and 28. But like Gina has mentioned, states are going to start thinking about this and planning for it. One thing that it will flag, and we go into more detail in our previous webinar along with in the brief, is that when it comes to area eligibility, at least, and I'll let Erin talk a little bit about CEP, is that with area eligibility, the good thing is that once you are area eligible, that is set for 5 years. So that's something to keep in mind too, is like that is locked in. One key strategy when it comes to summer and after school is to see, sites that are on that cusp of 50%, where are they in that 5-year cycle? And is it worth now, with the data that you have where you're eligible, re-upping that 5-year? Because you can do that with the program. So if you're an existing site and you are area eligible, you have that kind of, 5-year window, depending on where you are in that. But it would be especially for newer sites that want to come onto the program, or sites that are at the end of that cycle that could be potentially impacted. And I think we don't really have, a super clear idea of when all these changes will exactly happen. But I do think states are going to start thinking about this and the impact will be coming. Erin, do you want to touch about the CEP?
Sure. Similarly, CEP is a 4-year cycle because we like to keep things, interesting and different and keep you on your toes. But CEP is a 4-year cycle. So once you lock into CEP, a school is able to use those percentages for 4 years, but they can recertify at any point during that 4-year cycle if they have changes in ISP or if they have changes to their schools. So it's difficult to pinpoint an exact date and time. And then the other thing that we know that Gina has mentioned is that the cost shifts is a rollout too, right? It's not happening all at once at one time. So various states, depending on their error rate percentages, may start at a certain time versus another. So it's not very clear. We can't say like, here's the date where everyone on CEP is going to be impacted. But that is why we are recommending that schools and school districts really do that robust direct certification, really look at their numbers, because every time they restart, if you restart in April of 2026, that restarts your 4-year cycle. That gets you 1 more year past. And then if you restart it again in April 2027, that restarts the 4-year cycle and gets you another 4 years, another year or two past some of these bigger cost shifts.
And I know we said it, like, it doesn't mean they need to move forward, right? Like, our members of Congress have the power to say, right now we're dealing with a continuing resolution, right? The deadline is January 30th. What gets assigned or what gets decided are the priorities that our country feels are important. So we need to remind our members of Congress that getting rid of the cost share and the administrative costs, or at least delaying it a lot longer, is pivotal. And that's something that you can all do. I know you're dealing with a lot, but there's a quick action that everyone can do. And as I said earlier, FRAC is going to have a day of action. So we'll make sure we'll send you that information and other details of how you can continue talking about how these cuts interact and what sort of advocacy you can do both at the local, state, and federal level.
Great. Well, let's go to one question in the Q&A, and then Erin, I'm going to go to you for the question from Betty in the chat, and then maybe to Gina for the question from Robert in the chat. Okay, so one of the questions was, has FRAC been in touch with other organizations and leaders in the school and WIC spaces nationally? We work pretty closely with the with SNA, and I feel like we are have a shared understanding of what the cuts to SNAP will mean for school meals. And Kate, I'll turn it over to you to talk about WIC. And I know that Nell from the National WIC Association has been active in the chat, so they're with us today as well.
Yeah, I was going to mention National WIC, they're great partners of ours. And Nell, thank you for including information about the Modern WIC Act. That's something positive we can push for at the national level, which is really fantastic. So I think we are all, trying to stay in communication and work together so that we're giving consistent information to all of our partners.
All right, Erin, do you want to go to Betty's question? This is a question about, so Betty rightfully points out that kids that lose their access to SNAP can apply for free school meals through a school meal application, but we know that there are barriers and problems with that process. Erin, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So there are a multitude of barriers that prevent a family or a child from completing a school meal application. It can be stigma or shame, particularly if you are in a smaller district or a real community-based school district and you don't want maybe everyone knowing your income or personal business. There can be language barriers, literacy barriers, and we're also facing a real chilling effect right now with immigration. So that can also really prevent a lot of eligible individuals from applying for these benefits. Your question is what percentage? I don't have a direct answer for you on that one right now. The best that I can think of off the top of my head would be looking at some prior analyses of various proposals that affect SNAP. So thinking about that 2019 proposal that would have cut broad-based CAT-L and SNAP nationwide, and looking at the numbers that USDA came up with to determine what percentage of children would qualify for free meals, what percentage of children would then be dropped to reduced price meals. And then there was a percentage of children who, if we cut broad-based categorical eligibility, they would no longer be eligible for free school meals, even through the application process. To give you a percentage of that, I'm not aware if that analysis has been done. And I think it's different today, given the multitude of other societal influences that may impact a family's desire or ability or willingness to submit an application. So I don't have a percentage to share with you. I will do some digging to see if I can find anything on that, because it's definitely a worthwhile question. But we do know that there will be children who will still qualify for free school meals through an application. There are children who were previously directly certified who lose SNAP and they submit an application and now they qualify for reduced price meals. So they go from free to reduced. And there is a smaller portion of children who will no longer qualify for free or reduced price meals at all. It's very problematic and scary thinking about that.
All right, Gina, do you want to answer Robert's question? He's asking you to talk more about error rates and the cost share. Is there an opportunity for states to adjust, and is there an opportunity to leverage public-private investment?
Yeah, I think it's important to know first what are error rates. So the cost share means that for the first time in history, states have to pay a portion of benefits in line with their error rates, meaning that states who have more than 6% will have to do whether have to pay 5, 10, or 15% of the benefit costs. That's how we get to those numbers. But I think it's important for people to realize what error rates are. So for SNAP, are administrative and technical issues, such as, did someone submit paperwork on time, income changes. It's incredibly complex, particularly for those households who have very different circumstances. It is impacted by system transitions and shift in federal guidance. So one of the reasons why error rates went up, was COVID happened. Right, the pandemic happened. The federal government gave a lot of guidance to going through that time, but we also had caseworkers. We went from states, caseworkers having maybe $700 cases to having 3,000 cases, and that's just not sustainable. You can't put all of those cases on individuals, and there's also antiquated systems, IT systems that are in place on a lot of it. It's important to note that error rates are not intentional wrongdoing, and quality control, which is where we get the error rates, it applies a higher sort of scrutiny from the frontline case processing, and it doesn't net out underpayments, because error rates is this might have been overpaid, but also people were underpaid. They didn't get the full benefits that they would have gotten, and this inflates the reporter error rates. It's important to know that states already pay for this. If they have more than 6%, they have to do a corrective action plan where they have to identify the root causes. What is it that caused this? And they do get fined. They do go after overpayments and so on. So there's a system. What FY28 is going to do, what this cost share is going to do, is that these states are going to have to pay a certain amount. But there is something called a carve-out that was particularly done so that the Alaska senator would sign and the bill would move forward. And Alaska has such a high error rates that states that have a particular higher rates can push this back to FY30. So there is a carve out for about 10 states, but if you look at FY24 data, we're looking about 40 states that would be responsible for paying a cost share. And then the public-private partnership, I think the shutdown was the perfect example of how this is really a federal program. I think it's important to keep supporting it, the public-private partnership, but the reach that this program has, it really needs full federal support for it to be as impactful as it has been going. And we have a one fact sheet that has an explanation on these error rates and has an explanation so that you could see what your state may be responsible for. So we'll make sure to include that as a follow-up.
All right. Well, let me just see if any of the speakers want to add any final remarks. Otherwise, I think we'll turn it over to Steve to close out. All right, back to you, Steve.
Thanks, Alexis. Thank you all for coming. keep posted to our events page for future upcoming webinars. We should have some posted pretty soon. And I guess we'll close it out. Keep a lookout for our follow-up email, which will include slides, recording link, and additional resources that you can use in your advocacy. And we'll close it out now. Thanks.